Welcome back to the channel, everyone. As you can see behind me, we're back on the 59 Viking today. And as you saw in the intro to this video, I did something that I really didn't want to do, but I kind of had to do. So back up a day or two, I went to a local auto wrecker. I got this radiator. Now this is not the one that I had in here for mock-up. I had this one in here. This one that I found is actually out of a, I think it was 94 or 95 GM 3/4 ton with a 6.5 diesel. So you can see this rad is over 2 inches thick, which is perfect. It's a diesel radiator. It's meant to cool a diesel. I think it should be efficient and sufficient for this engine. I guess we'll find out. But based on my size constraints, that was the closest thing that I came up with that would fit in here. It was that or a diesel express fan, and those aren't very common to find. I wanted to find a used one to use for mock-up rather than just going out and buying a brand new one and hoping it was gonna work. This was a little bit cheaper of an option, so you can't really find an express fan with a diesel in the wrecking yard. It's not very common around here. And if something were to ever happen to a radiator and say I was stranded somewhere, I think this would be a more easier to find radiator than one out of an express fan. So that's why I went with this. I'm gonna try and make this work. But anyway, I have it mocked up in here. And as you saw, the grill's back in here now, but I did a little bit of cutting. So you can see I cut along the bottom 4.5 inches and I went up about 10 inches. The piece of metal is still in here in case I want to, you know, leave it and then just kind of box in the side here. I was hoping it wouldn't be as noticeable from the front by keeping this piece on here, but I think that just kind of looks weird when you're standing back and you're looking at it. The way that this sticks out further than this, I just don't think it looks quite right. So I think this probably will end up getting just cut off completely up around here where I have it, where it's bending right now, to get this rad to sit further forward. Because when I put the rad in initially, you can see my gap down there between the radiator and the crank balancer. It's probably 1.25 inches right now, 1.5 inches maybe. Before I cut the grill, that was maybe 1/4 inch away, and I didn't like that at all. Not to mention, if you ever blew a belt on the side of the road on this thing, you would never be able to get any kind of a bar in on that tensioner in order to replace your belt. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. I want to keep access to the tensioner. I want at least 1 inch clearance. So yeah, we had to cut into the header. It moved the bottom of the radiator out more, which makes me fairly straight with the belt drive, like it's fairly parallel there. And if I keep the radiator about centered on this piece right here, so roughly around there, and then I'll put 1/2 inch spacers between the header panel and the grill to bring the grill out a little bit. I found a set of pusher fans that will fit between the radiator and the grill. Now it is tight. They're 16-inch pusher fans, so I should be able to fit both of them in this opening. It'll be tight with the grill, tight with the hood latch, and tight with the sides. I'll have to do a little bit of trimming there, but I think I'm gonna order those up and hopefully I can make that work, because otherwise I don't know what else I'm going to do. But that's kind of what's been the theme with this thing. So now I'm just kind of figuring out how I'm going to make brackets to get the radiator to sit there. I have to make some kind of feet for it to sit on, and then tie that into some sort of brackets to come up and brace the whole front end, basically somewhere around in here. Now these are the factory upper mounts out of the 90s truck that I pulled the rad out of. And actually this looks like it's gonna work pretty good. I'll just figure out a way to cut this arm off and somehow weld it into this. And then that'll be a nice way to hold the top of the rad. But I'll have to figure out a way to mount the bottom and get it sitting right. Then my only other issue is basically the AC condenser. With those fans up in the front, I won't have room for an AC condenser. Now, if you look here on this side of the engine, I think I could probably fit a small condenser, but I don't know how efficient it'll be, because you're pushing the hot air from the radiator through the rad and then expecting that to cool down the condenser, which I don't know if that's really going to work all that well. Now there are other options, remote mount, mounted under the cab, under the flatbed with a fan on it, that kind of thing. I probably will end up doing that with the tranny cooler. I just don't know how I feel about putting an AC condenser down there. Yeah, if anyone has any thoughts on that, on putting the condenser behind the radiator and pushing air through it this way, let me know. Otherwise, I'm just gonna keep brainstorming and try to figure something out for that. We have the mounts tacked onto the frame now. I put them roughly where I think they should be to get the radiator support in the right spot. They're far enough back that they clear the grill once it's in here, but they're not so far back that you're going to be hitting the engine. So they're in a decent spot. I have the top of the mount flush with the top of the frame rail with the idea in mind that there'll be some sort of a shim between the mount and the radiator support that I can change the thickness if I need to change the height of the front end. So that's kind of my idea there. So those are just tacked in place just in case I need to move them for whatever reason. Then I went ahead and I actually fabricated this. So this is going to be the bottom of my radiator support. So this is all 1/8 inch steel, cut down square tubing. And then these are the factory bushings that came with this rad. They slip right on in there. And then once the radiator goes in, it sits perfectly in the two mounts. And then this bottom channel, it sits nice in there as well. And then the width of this bottom steel that I built is just thin enough, just narrow enough that it fits in the opening that I made in the grill. So the next thing I'm gonna go ahead and do is put this grill back on and then set this radiator support with the radiator back in the hole that I cut, and then try to get it figured out and figure out how I can attach this radiator support to those mounts. It's probably gonna be square tubing coming off at an angle and coming around like this to clear the grill, but I just need to put this in place so I can kind of get an idea of what I need to do to clear the grill and everything. Well, the entire body is officially mounted on the frame now. As you saw, I cut a couple uprights here, just some 1.5 inch tubing, welded them down at the bottom at the feet where they go onto the actual frame mounts. They come up, and then I have a couple ears welded on the sides here. Drilled a couple holes through the front. Those are hidden by the grill. This one might be a little bit exposed. This one should be hidden. I'll probably end up getting nicer hardware. And as we come back here, you have the 2 eyelets there and there mounted on there. Everything's just tacked in place for now. It already feels really solid actually. So once this is fully welded up, I'm sure it should be pretty good. I am probably still going to build off of this and go up either to the top of the fender up there or to this join right here between the header and the fender. Not too sure which way I'm gonna go yet, but I will continue building off of this to make it even stronger yet. So the next thing ideally I'd like to do is figure out the top rad mounts and figure out my distance from the engine. However, my fans aren't here yet, and I'd like to know where my distance is sitting between the grill and the radiator and how those fans are gonna sit in there before I figure out top mounts, depending on, you know, where I need the front or the top of the radiator sitting, because that'll depend where the top of the radiator actually sits, depending on what kind of clearance I need between the grill. So those fans are supposed to be here tomorrow. I'm gonna skip doing that for now. It can just sit there as is. But then the next thing I wanna do is actually get this bumper kind of sitting in the right spot at least, so I can kind of see if I have any room for any kind of coolers under here. Obviously the power steering cooler is easy. It's probably gonna end up right in this opening. I might just take this actual scoop out of here and then just leave this opening, and I can do a couple drop down brackets from the radiator support down and just hang the power steering cooler in this gap, because it honestly is like a perfect fit. But aside from that, I mean, if the sway bar wasn't here, I could probably do some kind of an intercooler down here, potentially an AC condenser, but the sway bar kind of gets in the way. But either way, I'm gonna cut a little bit off of the front of the frame here and then try to figure out some sort of bumper brackets so I can just kind of see what kind of room I have back here, just to see if maybe I can fit something in here somewhere. All right, so I have the bumper roughly sitting in place. Like you saw, I built those brackets there, come off of those top 2 bolts, go into the side of the frame rails, the inside edge of the frame rails. Right now it's just kind of roughly sitting on there. I don't have enough bolts right now, so I have the bolts in there holding it, and then the jack is kind of holding it from twisting, but this is roughly where it's gonna sit. It'll be a little bit further out than this, but overall I think this looks pretty good. It's actually sitting up probably 3-4 inches of where it was originally on the 59 frame. I always thought the bumper sat way too low on that truck, so I like the way this one sits. Seems like it's a nice height. I used the original bolts from it because those match the patina on the bumper. Once I get the right bolts and I can bolt these brackets into the frame, I'll start building the rest of the brackets. Like I have one that comes off of here and goes to that edge. And then there's a couple, I think, right about here and here that will also come up and bolt into the frame in the same spots where that bracket's bolted in. But overall, I'm pretty happy with how the bumper looks on here. But that is going to conclude it for today's video on the Viking. On my TikTok, the past couple of days, we've actually been having a really good discussion on air-to-water intercoolers and what kind of intercooler setup I should be running on this thing. I've had a couple people mention the 6.7 Power Stroke air-to-water intercooler setup and secondary cooling system, so I've been looking into that to maybe try to make it work on this thing. As well as we're still trying to figure out an AC condenser location. It may end up underneath the truck with the transmission cooler and a fan. All of that's still kind of up in the air, trying to figure it all out because as you can see, I'm kind of running out of room up front. Well, I kind of already did run out of room up front, but I'm going to measure and see if maybe I can fit a 4th gen Dodge intercooler kind of below the bumper, but in front of the sway bar. It's kind of a weird spot. I don't know if I'm going to be able to make that work, but I'm going to get some measurements and see if I can make that work. But yeah, like if you're interested in joining in on that discussion, check out my TikTok. I have a lot of videos posted on my Instagram as well if you want to check those out. Subscribe to those so you can see the early updates and see what we're talking about on this thing. But with all that being said, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Be sure to like this video. Comment down below if you have any suggestions on any of the cooling system things that I'm having issues with. But with all that being said, we'll see you guys in the next one.